A reservoir that has never been empty presses outward with the full and constant force of its supply. Not intermittently, not when conditions favor it, but continuously, without pause, without fatigue, without the slightest reduction in its will to deliver. Below it, a city waits, not all of it in darkness, but 1/4 of human life specifically. One neighborhood where the taps run dry and the pipes groan with absence rather than flow. The man who lives in that neighborhood has spent years constructing elaborate explanations for why nothing arrives. The reservoir is biased, the system is rigged, the pipes were built for others. Wallace Wattles looks at that man with the patient severity of a master who already knows the diagnosis and says, "The reservoir has not forgotten you. The supply has not been withheld. Somewhere between the infinite source and the life you are living, a single channel is blocked, and it was blocked from the inside." The man who lacks wealth does not, as a rule, interrogate the architecture of his own receiving. He interrogates the world. He examines the economy, the market, the actions of competitors, the misfortunes of timing, the cruelty of circumstance. And in each of these external territories, he finds what he was looking for: confirmation that the supply is insufficient, that the distribution is unjust, that the obstacle is outside him and therefore beyond his dominion. This diagnosis feels accurate because it is socially validated, historically repeated, and experientially comfortable. It requires nothing of the man who holds it, except the passive endurance of his condition. But Wallace Wattles does not permit this comfort. He approaches the diagnosis of poverty not as a social critic and not as an economist, but as a metaphysician who has traced the flow of wealth back to its source. And what he found at that source dismantles the scarcity assumption with the completeness of a law overriding an opinion. The supply of wealth that Wattles identifies is not capital held in the vaults of the privileged. It is not opportunity concentrated in the hands of the well-connected. It is the formless substance itself, the thinking stuff from which all visible things are made, which permeates all space, which fills all interstices of the universe, and which responds to the ordered thought of any mind that impresses it with clarity and force. This substance is not finite. It does not run low when one man draws upon it, any more than the ocean runs low when a single vessel fills its hull. It is omnipresent, inexhaustible, and this is the precision that separates Wattles from every comfort-offering teacher, actively seeking expression through every available human channel. The wealth is not waiting to be created. It is waiting to be received. The supply is not the variable. The receiver is. What Wattles establishes, therefore, is a complete inversion of the conventional diagnosis of poverty. The shortage is never at the source. It is always, without exception, at the point of receiving, at the specific inner condition of the man who stands between the infinite supply and the life he is trying to build. That inner condition is either open to the flow or contracted against it. And most people, Wattles observes with clinical precision, spend the entirety of their lives in the contracted state. Not because they chose contraction, not because they are flawed or disqualified, but because no one has ever shown them that the channel exists, that it has a specific structure, and that its governance is entirely within their own dominion. This is the discovery. This is what changes everything. What will be revealed here is not a strategy for accumulating wealth through superior effort or more intelligent planning. Strategies are tools of the competitive mind. They operate within the assumption that the supply is limited and must be seized through superior execution. What Wattles offers is of an entirely different order. He offers the identification of the one inner state that constitutes the complete and sufficient condition for opening the channel through which wealth flows. The precise quality of mind and being that removes every form of inner resistance between the infinite supply and the life of the man who has prepared himself to receive. This is not a practice to be performed on Tuesday mornings. It is not a mindset to be adopted during difficult periods. It is the understanding of a law, the receiving law, by which all wealth delivery into any human life is governed without exception at every moment, in every circumstance. Understanding this law changes the nature of every action a man takes. When the channel is open, action does not carry the desperate energy of a man trying to compensate for an absent supply. It carries the directed force of a man who is participating in the completion of a delivery already in motion. The difference between these two modes of action is not philosophical, it is structural. One produces results, the other produces exhaustion. One draws upon the infinite, the other draws only upon the limited reserves of a single man's will. Wattles saw this distinction with perfect clarity, and the teaching he built around it is precise enough to be applied, not as inspiration, but as law. Once the law is understood, the arrival of wealth becomes not a hope entertained between periods of doubt, but something closer to what Wattles himself called a mathematical certainty, a hydraulic inevitability that follows as directly from the open channel as water follows from the opened valve. The question that remains, the only question that has ever mattered, is whether you understand with genuine and operative clarity what it means to open the channel. What follows is that understanding, delivered not as encouragement, but as the precise and irrefutable teaching of a man who traced the mechanics of wealth to their deepest root and returned with a verdict that is not aged by a single day. The first thing to understand about the channel is that it is not a poetic construction. Wattles does not use the language of flow and openness as metaphor. He uses it as technical description, as the most precise language available to communicate a structural reality about the relationship between the inner state of a person and the movement of wealth through that person's life. The channel is the specific condition of the inner life at its interface with the formless substance. And that condition is either conductive to wealth or resistant to it, with the same consistency and the same indifference to personal preference that governs any law of nature. The sun does not negotiate with the surface it strikes. It delivers its energy in precise proportion to the receptivity of what receives it. The formless substance operates identically. It does not withhold, and it does not favor. It flows through whatever is open to it. What constitutes openness, then, in Wattles's precise formulation? It is not enthusiasm. It is not the performance of gratitude at designated times. It is not the repetition of affirmations that the conscious mind endorses and the deeper self contradicts. Openness, in the technical sense that governs receiving, is the quality of the dominant inner state. The state that a man inhabits, not in his best moments, but in his ordinary ones. Not when he is consciously attending to his development, but when his attention is elsewhere. When he is moving through the unguarded hours of his day, without the costume of deliberate practice. The channel reflects the dominant state, not the aspirational one. And the dominant state of most men is a precise and uninterrupted record of their deepest assumptions about what is available to them and what is not. Consider what it means for a state to be dominant. It means that it occupies the inner life, not by invitation, but by default. That it is the atmosphere the man breathes rather than the weather he occasionally notices. Fear when it is dominant, does not announce its presence in dramatic moments of visible terror. It operates quietly, below the threshold of conscious attention, as the background assumption that what is desired may not arrive, that the supply may prove insufficient, that the ground beneath current circumstances is less stable than it appears. This assumption, held continuously and without examination, is not a neutral psychological condition. In Wattles' framework, it is a physical force, a contraction of the inner channel that reduces the aperture through which wealth can pass with the same mechanical precision as a valve partially closed against a pressurized line. The contraction is not abstract. It produces specific and observable effects in the life of the man who carries it. It shapes the quality of his action, introducing a frantic, grasping quality that is the behavioral signature of a man who does not trust the supply. It shapes the quality of his perception, causing him to see threats where opportunities exist, scarcity where abundance presses to enter. It shapes the quality of his relationship with time, producing urgency, impatience, and the chronic anxiety of a man who believes that if the delivery does not arrive by a specific method at a specific moment, it will not arrive at all. Every one of these effects is the downstream consequence of the single upstream cause. The contracted channel, change the channel. And all of these effects change simultaneously, without requiring separate attention to each of them. What then is the nature of the expanded channel? The inner condition that Wattles identifies as fully open to the flow of wealth. It begins with what he calls faith, but this word requires immediate clarification because it has been so thoroughly colonized by usage that its precise meaning is almost invisible. Wattles does not mean religious faith, though he would not exclude it. He does not mean the optimistic belief that things will probably work out. He means something more specific and more demanding. The settled, uncontradicted inner knowing that the supply exists, that it is moving, and that it is moving specifically toward this man, in this life, in response to the specific form his thought has impressed upon the formless substance. This knowing is not manufactured by repetition. It is arrived at by understanding, by following the logic of the law to its conclusion and remaining there, without retreating into the comfort of conventional doubt. Faith of this quality does not waver in the presence of contrary evidence, because it does not operate on the level of evidence. Evidence is a report on the visible world, on what has already arrived, on what the contracted channels of the past have produced. The man who governs his inner state by evidence is always behind the law, always reacting to yesterday's delivery record rather than opening to tomorrow's supply. Wattles positions faith not as the belief that good things will happen, but as the accurate perception of a reality that is already operating. The invisible movement of wealth through the formless substance toward the man whose channel is prepared to receive it. Evidence does not create this movement. It merely confirms it after the fact to those who required confirmation. Alongside faith, Wattles places gratitude, and it is here that his teaching reaches its most precise and most demanding formulation. Gratitude, as he defines it, is not the warm sentiment produced by receiving something one wanted. It is the active, continuous acknowledgement of the good that already exists in the man's life and world. An acknowledgement maintained not because conditions warrant it at every moment, but because the man understands that gratitude is the specific inner mechanism by which the channel is held open against the contracting force of circumstances. To be in genuine gratitude is to be in accurate relationship with reality. Because the reality is that the supply has always been flowing. The good has always existed in far greater measure than the contracted mind has been able to perceive. And that the posture of acknowledgement creates the inner expansion through which more of what already exists can flow into the life that is prepared to receive it. The relationship between gratitude and expansion is not mystical. It is mechanical, in the deepest sense of that word. A mind fixed in genuine gratitude is a mind that has, by that very fixation, released the contracting grip of fear, resentment, and scarcity thinking. It cannot simultaneously hold the authentic recognition of existing good and the conviction that good is absent or insufficient. These states are structurally incompatible, and gratitude, when it is genuine and sustained, is the stronger force. This is why Wattles returns to it with such insistence. Of all the inner states available to the man who wishes to open his channel, gratitude is the one that accomplishes the most with the least resistance, because it does not require the man to deny his present circumstances, only to look past them at the supply that already surrounds them. There is a third quality that Wattles identifies as constitutive of the open channel, one that is less frequently discussed and perhaps more difficult to sustain, what he calls creative vision. This is not the visualization practice of later traditions, though it shares some of its mechanics. It is the sustained, detailed, emotionally inhabited image of the desired reality, held not as a wish being sent outward, but as a form being impressed upon the formless substance, which then reorganizes itself in accordance with that form. The channel is not merely opened by gratitude and faith. It is given a specific direction by the clarity of the vision through which the man has defined what he intends to receive. A channel without direction is an open pipe without a destination. The supply enters, but it disperses without accumulating into the specific form the man requires. The three qualities together, faith, gratitude, and creative vision, do not operate as separate instruments to be picked up and put down independently. They constitute a single, unified inner state, each one supporting and amplifying the others. Faith without gratitude can become brittle, a conviction untempered by the warmth of recognition. Gratitude without vision can become passive, a contentment that does not call forth the new. Vision without faith can become anxious, an image held with hope rather than certainty, introducing the very doubt that contracts the channel it is meant to open. But the three together, held simultaneously and consistently, constitute what Wattles describes as the fully open channel, a human inner life in complete structural alignment with the principle that governs all receiving, in all domains, at all times. This alignment is not a condition that the man visits. It is a condition that he inhabits continuously as the dominant texture of his inner life, rather than as a state he achieves in meditation and abandons in the marketplace. This is the demand that separates genuine understanding of the law from its superficial adoption. The channel is open or closed in every moment, not only in the moments the man has designated for its tending. The formless substance does not pause its assessment of the man's inner state while he attends to the business of the day. It responds continuously, with the impersonal precision of a natural law, to whatever condition the channel is in at every moment, which means that the governance of the channel is not a practice performed in addition to life. It is life itself, rightly understood and rightly ordered. What the man who achieves sustained channel openness discovers in time is that the governance is not an effort. The effort belongs to the early period, the period during which the contracting habits of the old inner life must be examined, understood, and gradually replaced by states that conduct rather than resist. But once the new states become dominant, once gratitude and faith and creative vision occupy the position in the inner life that fear and doubt and scarcity thinking previously held, the governance of the channel requires no more effort than breathing. It is the natural condition of the man whose understanding of the law has become operative. He is not trying to be open. He is open because he has understood that the alternative is not a neutral state, but a specific and unnecessary form of self-imposed obstruction. This is the architectural fact at the center of Wattles' teaching, the one that changes everything once it is genuinely grasped. The man who lacks wealth is not a man who has been denied. He is a man who has been blocked, and the blockage is his own, constructed from the materials of his own inner life, maintained by habits of thought so old they feel like facts rather than choices. To understand this is not a comfortable thing. It offers no external party to hold responsible, no circumstance to blame, no force outside the man's own dominion to point to as the cause of his condition. But this is precisely why it is liberating. If the blockage is the man's own construction, then its removal is also the man's own dominion. The law that blocked is the same law that opens, and the law is always available, always operative, and always absolutely just. The logic that supports this teaching is not confined to the metaphysical claims of a single thinker working at the turn of the 20th century. It arrives from multiple directions simultaneously. From the structure of how thought operates upon material reality, from the observable correspondence between inner state and outer circumstance, and from the deepest traditions of philosophy regarding the relationship between form and substance. What Wattles understood with particular precision is that wealth, like all visible phenomena, is not primary. It is the visible expression of an invisible cause. And the invisible cause is always a condition of mind, a quality of thought, an impression delivered to the formless substance with sufficient clarity and force to organize that substance into the specific form the thinker intended. Wealth does not precede the inner state that called it forth. It follows it, with the reliability of an effect following its cause. This is the logic that destroys the popular assumption about the relationship between action and result. The conventional view holds that vigorous, intelligent action is the primary cause of wealth. That a man who acts with sufficient energy and sufficient strategy will, in time, produce the results he seeks regardless of his inner state. Wattles does not dismiss action. He insists upon it. But he locates it correctly within the causal sequence. And this relocation changes everything about its quality and its power. Action is not the cause of wealth. It is the physical channel through which wealth, already set in motion by the inner state that preceded the action, arrives in the visible world. The man who acts from a contracted, fearful, scarcity-dominated inner state is applying the physical channel to a blocked invisible one. He may produce results through sheer force of will, but they will be small, difficult, and exhausting. Because he is working against the very law that was designed to work for him. The man who acts from an open channel, conversely, finds that his actions carry a force disproportionate to their apparent magnitude. That small, clear actions taken in a state of faith and gratitude produce results that a man working from the contracted state could not achieve through vastly greater effort. This is not a mystical observation. It is the observable consequence of a man whose inner state is in alignment with the law of receiving. His action is amplified by the supply moving through him. He is not acting alone. He is acting as the visible expression of an invisible force that is already organized in his favor. Wattles describes this as the man becoming a creative center, a point through which the formless substance is channeling its creative energy into the specific form the man has held in his vision. The channel is not separate from the man. The channel is the man in his full inner condition. Consider the precision of this logic applied to the experience of time. The contracted man experiences time as the enemy of his ambitions, always insufficient, always running out, always threatening to foreclose the possibilities he has not yet managed to secure. This experience of time is not neutral. It introduces urgency, which is the behavioral expression of fear, which contracts the channel further, which produces the very results: the delays, the setbacks, the missed deliveries that the urgency was attempting to prevent. It is a closed loop of self-confirming contraction, and it is one of the most common and most invisible forms of channel blockage that Wattles identifies. The open channel relates to time entirely differently. The man whose channel is clear does not experience urgency, because urgency presupposes a limited supply that must be seized before it disappears. He experiences what might be called purposeful patience, the directed activity of a man who knows that what is moving toward him will arrive, and whose role is to act fully in the present while trusting completely in the delivery. The logic extends to the domain of method, to how wealth arrives, through which specific channels, by which specific means. This is perhaps the most practically significant implication of the receiving law, and it is one that most seekers of wealth never adequately consider. The contracted man, in his anxiety to secure the supply, tends to fix his attention not only on what he wants, but on exactly how it must arrive. He specifies the employer, the business model, the investment, the relationship, the precise pipe through which he has decided the water must flow. And in doing so, he partially closes his channel to every other means of delivery that the formless substance might employ. Wattles is explicit about this mechanism. The supply is creative, not mechanical. It does not deliver through the paths the receiver has authorized. It delivers through whatever paths are available. And the receiver who is attached to a single path has, by that attachment, reduced his own channel to a fraction of its potential aperture. The logic here is not an argument for passivity or for the suspension of practical planning. It is an argument for a specific quality of inner relationship with the plane, one in which the plan is pursued with full energy and full commitment, while remaining genuinely open to delivery from directions the plan did not anticipate. This is a subtle distinction, but it is the difference between the contracted channel and the open one in their most practically relevant expression. The man who pursues his plan with full force while holding it loosely, who acts as if the plan matters without acting as if it is the only possible channel, is demonstrating the inner architecture of genuine receptivity. He is not attached to the method. He is committed to the reception, and this distinction, invisible to the outside observer, is everything in the domain of what actually arrives. There is a deeper layer to the logic still, one that touches the most fundamental question about the nature of wealth itself. Wattles does not define wealth as the accumulation of money or the possession of objects. He defines it as the full expression of life, the complete development and deployment of every capacity the man possesses, supported by every material condition that capacity requires. Wealth, so defined, is not a destination. It is a state of being, one in which the man is fully alive to his own nature, fully expressive of his own creative force, and fully supplied with everything that expression requires. This definition transforms the nature of what it means to open the channel. The man who opens his channel to wealth is not opening himself to acquisition. He is opening himself to the full expression of what he is. And the material abundance that accompanies this expression is not the goal, but the natural and inevitable result of a man living in complete alignment with the creative principle that governs all life. This understanding of wealth as full expression, rather than mere accumulation, also clarifies the mechanism by which the channel is opened. A man who seeks wealth as accumulation is, at the deepest level, seeking it from a place of perceived insufficiency. And perceived insufficiency is, structurally, a contracted state. The very motivation introduces a constriction. But a man who seeks wealth as the full expression of his own creative nature is seeking it from a place of genuine aliveness, from the desire to become and to give more fully, not from the fear of not having enough. This is not a semantic distinction. It is a structural one that reaches all the way into the quality of the channel. The creative desire expands the channel. The acquisitive anxiety contracts it. And the outer results of each state are precisely what the inner architecture of each state predicts. Wattles understood this with a precision that anticipates the findings of those who would later study the psychology of motivation and the neuroscience of the contracted versus the expansive cognitive state, though he would not have used those terms, and the validation they offer is secondary to the law itself. The law does not require validation by later disciplines. It was operative before those disciplines existed. What later disciplines offer is the confirmation that the inner architecture Wattles described. The contracted state of fear and the expanded state of gratitude and faith corresponds to observable differences in how the human mind processes information, perceives opportunity, and generates action. The contracted state narrows perception. The expanded state broadens it. The contracted state produces reactive, defensive action. The expanded state produces creative, generative action. The channel metaphor is not poetry. It is an accurate description of a physiological and psychological reality that Wattles located through philosophical inquiry alone. The logic also addresses directly the most common objection raised against the receiving law, the objection from circumstance. A man in genuine material difficulty, the objection goes, cannot reasonably be expected to inhabit a state of gratitude and faith and creative vision when the visible evidence of his life contradicts every one of these states at every moment. This is the most sympathetic objection, and it deserves the most rigorous response. Wattles's answer is not to dismiss the difficulty of the man's circumstances. It is to observe, with clinical precision, that governing the inner state in the presence of contrary external evidence is not a luxury available only to those whose circumstances are already favorable. It is the specific and necessary work of every man who wishes to change his circumstances. Because the circumstances are the downstream effect of the inner state, not its cause. Waiting for circumstances to improve before inhabiting the open state is waiting for the effect to precede the cause. The law does not operate that way. It has never operated that way. And no amount of sympathy for the difficulty of the undertaking changes the direction in which causation flows. This is perhaps the hardest truth in Wattles's entire system, the one that most readers of his work encounter and then quietly set aside because its demand is too absolute. He does not offer a modified version of the law for difficult circumstances. He offers the law in its full and uncompromising form and observes that the difficulty of applying it in adverse conditions is precisely what makes it valuable. The man who can hold the open state only when conditions are favorable has not mastered the law. He has merely benefited from it during the periods when external circumstances happen to support an expanded inner state. And when those circumstances contract, his channel will contract with them, and the supply will diminish accordingly. The man who has genuinely understood the receiving law holds the open state not because circumstances support it, but because he understands that the open state is the cause of circumstances, not their effect. This understanding, operative, not merely conceptual, is the ultimate expression of channel mastery. The receiving law, stated in its most compressed form, is this: the inner state determines the aperture of the channel. The aperture of the channel determines what can flow through it, and what flows through it determines what arrives in the man's life. Every link in this chain is a matter of law, not preference, immutable, impersonal, and absolutely precise. The man who understands this and orders his inner life accordingly is not practicing a technique. He is aligning himself with a principle that was operative before he was born and will remain operative long after he is gone. He is not doing something special. He is, for perhaps the first time, doing something right. Something in correspondence with the actual structure of how wealth moves through the world. And once that correspondence is established and maintained, the only thing that can prevent the arrival of abundance is the same thing that always could: the deliberate reclosing of the channel he has learned to open. James Allen, writing in the same decade in which Wattles was developing his own formulations, arrived at his central principle from a different direction, but landed with precision upon the same territory. Allen's inquiry was not into the nature of wealth specifically, but into the nature of the man who receives or fails to receive, into the inner architecture of character that determines with absolute consistency the quality of what a man's life produces. His fundamental claim, stated with the plainness of a man who has left rhetoric behind in favor of precision, is that the outer life of a man is the exact expression of his inner root system. Not an approximation, not a general tendency, an exact expression. As mathematically precise as the relationship between a seed and the plant it becomes, as structurally determined as the relationship between a foundation and the structure it supports. What you find in the visible life of any man is a faithful and complete report on the condition of his inner life, which means that the task of changing what arrives is always, exclusively, the task of changing what is rooted. What Allen grows in the conceptual soil of his teaching is the root, the deep, invisible, foundational quality of character and inner state, from which the outer life necessarily unfolds. He is not primarily interested in the surface. He examines the root with the patience and precision of a botanist who knows that the health of every visible part of the plant is determined entirely by what is happening below the surface, out of sight, in the domain that most observers ignore entirely. A man whose root is contaminated with fear, resentment, or the assumption of unworthiness will produce, from that root, a life that expresses those qualities with perfect fidelity. Regardless of what he plants on the surface through conscious intention, regardless of what strategies he employs to produce different results without touching the root. Allen's teaching is ruthless in this regard. You cannot grow a different plant from the same root. The surface interventions produce temporary variations. The root determines the enduring character of the harvest. This is the point at which Allen's teaching and Wattles's receiving law converge with a force that neither could achieve independently. Allen identifies the root as the primary determinant of the outer life. Wattles identifies the specific inner condition, the precise quality of the root. that opens the channel through which wealth flows. Allen says, "What you have rooted determines what you receive." Wattles says, "What opens the receiving channel is this specific inner quality, held in this specific way, maintained at this specific level of consistency." Together, they do not offer two philosophies of self-development. They offer one complete and interlocking description of the causal chain that runs from the deepest level of a man's inner life to the most visible feature of his outer circumstances. Allen builds the root. Wattles opens the channel. The man who understands both has been given the complete architectural plan of a life of unobstructed receiving. And it is a plan drawn entirely from the inside out. The inner condition that Wattles specifies as channel opening, the sustained state of faith, gratitude, and clear creative vision, is precisely what Allen would recognize as a deeply healthy root. Not a root that produces pleasant feelings or a sense of spiritual advancement, but a root that is structurally aligned with the law of growth, the law of cause and effect, and the law of correspondence that governs the relationship between inner and outer in every domain of life. A root of this quality does not merely feel good to inhabit. It produces, with the mechanical precision of biological law, a life whose visible features correspond to its invisible foundation. Abundance, expansion, the progressive development of every capacity, and the continuous arrival of the material conditions required for the full expression of a creative, purposeful existence. What is most significant about the alignment between Allen and Wattles is not that two men arrived at similar conclusions independently. What is significant is what their convergence reveals about the territory they were both mapping. When two thinkers of genuine depth, approaching the same question from different angles with different methods, arrive at a description of the same causal principle, the reliability of that description increases substantially. It is not a matter of agreeing with either man out of admiration for his prose. It is a matter of recognizing that both are describing the same operative reality, the same invisible architecture of the relationship between inner and outer life. Because that architecture is real, and the precision of genuine inquiry eventually reaches it regardless of the path taken. The supply has always been present. The inner condition has always been the variable. Allen called it the root. Wattles called it the channel. The law they both described is the same law, and it has not changed. What does it mean, concretely, for a man to have grown the root that Allen describes and opened the channel that Wattles prescribes simultaneously? It means that his inner life is not divided against itself, that the deep, habitual quality of his character is in alignment with the deliberate quality of his conscious states, so that there is no gap between what he intends to receive and what his deepest assumptions about his own nature and worthiness actually permit. This alignment is rarer than it appears, and its absence is the most common source of the subtle, persistent channel constrictions that prevent men of genuine aspiration from receiving in proportion to their effort. They have planted the surface intention without addressing the root assumption. They have opened the channel at the level of conscious practice while leaving it blocked at the level of deep character. Allen's teaching addresses the root. Wattles' teaching addresses the channel. Both are necessary. Neither is sufficient without the other. The preparation that Allen describes, the purification of character, the cultivation of the inner root through sustained discipline and honest self-examination, is not separate from the work of opening the channel. It is its foundation. A man who attempts to hold Wattles' three opening states, faith, gratitude, and creative vision, without having done the root work that Allen prescribes, will find them slipping, contaminated by the buried contradictions of an unexamined inner life. The gratitude will be genuine on the surface and quietly undermined by resentment at depth. The faith will be consciously maintained and unconsciously contradicted by the ancient assumption that good things arrive for other people, not for this specific man. The vision will be held with clarity during the designated hours of practice and quietly dissolved by the background static of unworthiness during the unguarded hours. The root must be addressed. Allen is the map for that addressing. Wattles is the map for what becomes possible once it has been done. Together, Allen and Wattles describe an inside job of such completeness that no external variable remains with causal relevance. The economy does not determine what flows through an open channel. The market does not ratify or veto the receiving of a man whose inner root is healthy and whose channel is clear. The behavior of competitors, the timing of circumstances, the opinions of others about the man's chances. None of these operate at the level of cause in a life ordered according to the principles both men describe. They operate at the level of appearance, the surface phenomena of a visible world that is always, without exception, catching up to the invisible reality that the man's inner life has already established. This is not idealism in the sense of wishful thinking. It is idealism in its precise philosophical sense. The position that the primary reality is the invisible one, and that the visible is its dependent expression. Both Allen and Wattles held this position not as a comfort, but as a law, and they acted upon it, wrote from within it, and described its mechanics with a precision that the superficial reader may miss and the careful one cannot. The practical implication of this alignment, of Allen's root work and Wattles's channel opening, is that the man who undertakes both simultaneously is not doing twice the work of the man who undertakes either alone. He is doing the only work that actually addresses the causal level of his situation. Everything else, the strategies, the tactics, the external maneuvers, operates at the level of effect. They may shift the effects temporarily. They do not alter the cause. Only the inner work alters the cause. And the inner work, rightly understood and rightly ordered, does not require more time than the man has available. It requires the reallocation of attention from the surface, where no decisive intervention is possible, to the root and the channel, where every decisive intervention is available at every moment, regardless of external circumstance. This is the agreement between Allen and Wattles that matters most, that the work is available now, that its results are determined entirely by the quality of its execution, and that the man who understands both the root and the channel has, in his understanding alone, already taken the most significant step toward the life that their combined teaching describes. Understanding, in this context, is not merely intellectual, it is operative. The kind of knowing that changes behavior not because it instructs behavior from the outside, but because it changes the inner structure from which all behavior flows. When the root is right and the channel is open, the behavior that follows is not compliance with a teaching. It is the natural expression of an inner life that has been brought into alignment with the law of receiving. And the law, once given a properly aligned channel, does the rest. The channel opening work that Wattles prescribes cannot be completed without a rigorous and unsentimental examination of the specific inner states that close the channel. And Wattles conducts this examination with the same clinical precision that marks every other aspect of his teaching. He does not invite the man to feel compassionate toward his blockages, to understand their origins, or to forgive himself for having maintained them. He identifies them as precise mechanical obstructions whose effect on the channel is measurable and whose correction is entirely within the man's dominion. The first and most pervasive of these is resentment, not necessarily the dramatic, burning resentment of a man consumed by a specific grievance, but the low, chronic, ambient resentment of a man who believes that the distribution of wealth in the visible world is unjust, that others have received what should have been his, that the system favors the already favored and neglects those who most need its abundance. This belief feels like social analysis. It is, in its effect upon the channel, a contraction of the most severe kind. The mechanism by which resentment closes the channel is precise and worth examining carefully. Resentment is, at its structural core, the fixed attention upon the inadequacy of what has arrived, upon the gap between what exists and what is desired, held not with the creative tension of unfulfilled vision, but with the bitter energy of one who feels entitled to what has been withheld. This orientation directs the man's inner force backward, toward what is absent and toward the parties perceived as responsible for its absence. It does not call forth the new. It fixates upon the lack. And since the formless substance responds to the dominant direction of attention, impressing itself with the form most consistently held in the man's inner life, resentment is, with perfect mechanical logic, an instruction to produce more of the lack it is fixated upon. The man who resents his poverty is, in this precise sense, commanding the continuation of his poverty through the most intimate channel available to him, the direction of his own sustained attention. Fear operates through a somewhat different mechanism, but with equivalent destructive precision. Where resentment looks backward at what was not received, fear looks forward at what might not arrive. At the possibility of failure, insufficiency, loss, and the specific disasters that the anxious imagination constructs from the raw material of present uncertainty. Wattles does not treat fear as an emotional problem requiring psychological management. He treats it as a practical obstruction requiring philosophical correction. The correction, specifically, of the false premise upon which all fear of insufficiency is based. That false premise is scarcity. The assumption that the supply is limited, that what one man receives diminishes what is available to another, and that the future holds genuine danger of absence, rather than the certainty of supply for the man whose channel is open. When this premise is corrected, when the man genuinely understands, not merely believes on good days, that the supply is infinite and the channel is the only variable, fear loses its ground. It has nothing to stand on. It is a symptom of the scarcity assumption, and when the assumption is dissolved by genuine understanding, the symptom resolves without requiring separate attention. Competitive thinking is a subtler channel-closing force, and it deserves particular attention because it can present itself as productive ambition. The competitive mind does not, on its surface, appear to be engaged in channel-closing activity. It is working, planning, striving, measuring itself against others, and attempting to gain advantage in a domain it perceives as contested. It may produce results, especially in the early stages when the sheer force of its competitive energy generates action. But Wattles identifies it as fundamentally channel closing because it operates from the premise of limitation. The premise that the wealth available must be divided among those competing for it, and that success means securing a larger portion of a finite supply at the expense of those who receive less. This premise, regardless of the energy with which it is held, is a contraction. It aligns the man's inner life with the reality of limitation, and the formless substance, responding with impersonal precision to the form impressed upon it, delivers limitation in return. The creative mind, which Wattles opposes to the competitive one, does not seek to divide a finite supply. It seeks to call forth new supply, to impress the formless substance with a specific form that has not yet been expressed in the visible world, and to receive from that impression the unique manifestation of wealth that corresponds to the unique creative vision the man has developed and sustained. This is not merely a philosophical distinction. It has immediate practical consequences. The man operating from creative thinking does not experience other men's success as a diminishment of his own possibilities. He experiences it as evidence of the law's operation, proof that the supply is flowing, that channels are open, that the formless substance is actively delivering. This perception expands his own channel further, because it is the perception of an abundant world rather than a contested one. Every successful man, seen through this lens, is not a competitor who has taken what might have been yours. He is a demonstration of what becomes possible when the channel is open. Anxiety about method, about how the wealth will arrive, through which specific channel, by which precise mechanism, is perhaps the most practically obstructive of all the channel closing states, because it is the one most easily confused with prudent planning. The man who is anxious about method is not simply planning carefully. He is, at the level of his inner state, refusing to trust the creative intelligence of the formless substance, insisting that the delivery must arrive through the door he is watching, and therefore closing every other door through which it might equally or more efficiently enter. Wattles is explicit and without sympathy on this point. The formless substance is not constrained by the man's preferred delivery method. It moves through whatever channel is available, through whatever sequence of events serves the creative plan, through whatever combination of people, circumstances, and opportunities aligns with the vision that has been impressed upon it. The man who has specified the method has not demonstrated practical wisdom. He has demonstrated a failure of trust in the law. And that failure, manifesting as attachment to a single channel of delivery, reduces his actual receiving to a fraction of what an open, unattached channel would produce. There is a category of channel closing state that operates at a depth below all of the above, and is therefore the most difficult to identify and the most consequential to address. Wattles does not give it a single name, but its description is unmistakable. It is the state of a man who has intellectually accepted the principles of the receiving law, but has never genuinely applied them to his own specific case, who believes the law operates for men in general, but harbors the quiet, persistent, never quite examined conviction that it will not operate for him specifically. This state is not doubt in the conventional sense. It does not appear as visible disbelief. It appears as the general endorsement of a principle, combined with the private exemption of the self from that principle's operation. The man who carries it will speak the language of abundance, hold genuine admiration for the teaching, and continue to produce, with perfect consistency, the results of a closed channel. Because the channel is closed at the level of self-application, which is the only level that matters. The recognition of this specific blockage requires a quality of inner honesty that most men prefer to avoid. Not because they are lacking in courage, but because the examination of one's deepest assumptions about what is specifically available to oneself is an uncomfortable business that does not yield its results quickly or comfortably. Wattles does not offer a shortcut through this examination. He offers the principle that makes it necessary. The channel does not respond to general endorsement of the law. It responds to the man's actual, operative inner state at the level of his specific relationship with his own receiving. General belief in abundance is insufficient. The channel opens to the specific man who applies the law specifically, personally, and without the private exception that the comfortable mind so naturally carves out for itself. The correction of these channel closing states is not, in Wattles's formulation, primarily a psychological process. It does not require extended analysis of their origins or protracted therapeutic engagement with their emotional weight. It requires the installation of their opposites. Not through the forcible suppression of the closing states, but through the deliberate, sustained cultivation of the opening ones, which, when genuinely inhabited, leave no space for their opposites to occupy. A mind genuinely fixed in gratitude cannot simultaneously maintain the posture of resentment. A man genuinely settled in the faith of expectancy cannot simultaneously sustain the anxiety of fear. The positive states do not fight the negative ones. They displace them by occupying the territory those states previously held. This is the practical mechanics of channel opening. Not the analysis of what blocks, but the deliberate installation of what opens, maintained with sufficient consistency to become the dominant state, and therefore, in time, the default one. The sequence of correction that Wattles implies is worth stating explicitly. It begins not with feeling, but with understanding, with a genuine, operative comprehension of why the channel closing states are structurally incompatible with receiving. A man who understands why fear closes the channel. In the same way he understands why a partially closed valve reduces flow, has a relationship with his own fear that is qualitatively different from the man who merely wishes he felt less fearful. The understanding creates a distance from the state, a gap between the occurrence of the state and the man's identification with it, that makes the deliberate choice of an alternative state possible in a way it was not before. Without understanding, the channel opening states feel like performances imposed upon genuine feelings. With understanding, they are the accurate response to a correctly perceived reality, and they are sustainable because they are true, not because they are willed. The final observation Wattles makes about the channel closing states is perhaps the most severe, and it concerns the man who has been given the teaching, has understood it, and has not acted upon it. This man is in a more contracted state than the man who never received the teaching, because he now carries the additional weight of unrealized understanding. The specific contraction produced by knowing the law and continuing to violate it through the maintenance of states whose incompatibility with receiving he can no longer honestly deny. Wattles does not state this to produce guilt, because guilt is itself a channel closing state. He states it to clarify the nature of the choice the man faces at the point of genuine understanding. The channel opens with a specific inner state. The state is available at every moment. The man who has understood the teaching is the man who can no longer plead ignorance as the explanation for his closed channel. He is left with only one question: not whether he wants the abundance, but whether he is willing to inhabit, continuously and without exception, the inner state that is the sole condition of its arrival. The fully open channel, in Wattles's precise formulation, is not produced by a single inner state held in isolation, but by three specific states held simultaneously and with mutual reinforcement, each one serving a distinct function in the architecture of receiving, and each one incomplete without the support of the other two. The first of these is clarity of vision, not vague wanting, not the general desire for more or better or different. Clarity of vision, as Wattles defines it, is a specific, detailed, emotionally inhabited image of the desired reality, held with the inner certainty of a man who has already accepted delivery, not the tentative hope of a man who is petitioning for something he is not sure he will receive. The distinction is not primarily emotional. It is structural. The quality of the inner image determines the quality of the form impressed upon the formless substance. And a vague impression produces a vague result with the same mechanical consistency that a blurred lens produces a blurred photograph. The formless substance does not interpret. It responds to what it receives. If what it receives is a specific, detailed, emotionally inhabited form, it organizes itself toward that form. If what it receives is a general wish overlaid with doubt, it has nothing precise enough to work with. What does it mean to hold a vision with the certainty of a man who has already accepted delivery? It means that the inner relationship with the desired reality is not one of longing, but of recognition. The quiet, settled acknowledgement of something that is already in motion through the invisible world, already organized in the formless substance, already completing its transition into the visible domain. This is not a psychological technique of imagining the future as present. It is a metaphysical accuracy. The claim that what has been genuinely impressed upon the formless substance with sufficient clarity and force is, in the most meaningful sense of the word, already real, already existing as a formed reality in the invisible domain, awaiting only the completion of its transit into the visible one. The man who holds his vision with this understanding is not pretending. He is being accurate. He is reporting on the condition of the invisible world as it actually stands at the moment of genuine, clear, sustained impression. The second state, active gratitude, does not supplement the vision. It creates the energetic field in which the vision can operate without the interference of the contracting states that would otherwise erode it. Gratitude, as Wattles defines it, is the continuous, genuine acknowledgement of every good that already exists. The living recognition, maintained not as a periodic practice, but as a permanent orientation, that the supply has always been flowing and has always been sufficient for every genuine need. This recognition is not manufactured by cataloging blessings in a journal, though such practices may support it. It is a direct perception of reality, the accurate seeing of a world in which good exists in far greater measure than the contracted mind has been able to register. The contracted mind filters perception through the assumption of scarcity, which causes it to overlook the good that is present and amplify the evidence of insufficiency. Genuine gratitude is the dissolution of that filter, the recovery of accurate perception, and with it comes the inner expansion that holds the channel open against every circumstance that tries to close it. The relationship between gratitude and the vision it protects is worth examining with care. A man who holds a clear vision of the desired reality without the foundation of genuine gratitude is holding that vision in a field contaminated by the implicit comparison between what is wanted and what currently exists. A comparison that, when attended to, produces the very awareness of absence that contracts the channel. The vision, in this case, becomes a source of tension rather than a source of direction, a constant reminder of the gap between present reality and desired reality, experienced not as creative tension, but as anxious insufficiency. Gratitude dissolves this contamination by creating a foundation of genuine adequacy. Not the adequacy of having everything one wants, but the adequacy of a man who is in accurate relationship with a supply that is moving toward him, who recognizes the good already present as evidence of the law's operation rather than as a consolation prize for what has not yet arrived. The third state, the faith of expectancy, is the one that closes the loop and constitutes the channel's full operational capacity. Faith of expectancy, distinguished from hope by its complete absence of uncertainty, is the settled conviction that What has been impressed upon the formless substance with clarity and held in the field of gratitude is already completing its delivery. That no intervention is required, no anxiety justified, no desperate monitoring of results necessary. It is the inner posture of a man who has placed an order with a supplier he knows to be both capable and reliable, and who has simply moved forward with his life while the delivery completes. The absence of urgency in this state is not the absence of engagement. It is the presence of trust. Trust not in a vague and undefined benevolence, but in the specific and reliable operation of a specific law, applied correctly and therefore guaranteed to produce its specific result. A man who places a seed in good soil and trusts the law of growth does not dig it up daily to check its progress. He waters it, tends the soil, and waits with the calm certainty of one who knows what seeds in good soil inevitably become. The three states together, clarity of vision, active gratitude, and faith of expectancy, do not merely coexist in the fully open channel. They amplify one another in a specific sequence. The clarity of vision gives gratitude a direction. It is not merely thankfulness for the general supply, but the specific recognition that the supply is moving toward a specific form, making that form's arrival a matter of recognition rather than hope. The gratitude gives the vision a field in which to operate without contamination by the contracting awareness of present insufficiency, and the faith of expectancy, resting on the foundation of the clear vision and the grateful field, holds both stable against the disrupting force of contrary external evidence. Not by refusing to see the evidence, but by correctly situating it as a report on the past rather than a forecast of the future. Together, the three states constitute what Wattles calls the fully open channel, and their absence, in any combination or degree, constitutes a precise and measurable constriction of that channel. The most demanding aspect of this formulation is the simultaneity requirement. It is not sufficient to hold clarity of vision on Sunday mornings and gratitude on Tuesday evenings and faith during periods of visible progress. The law responds to the dominant state, the state that holds the field not in the designated hours, but in the ordinary, unguarded, unglamorous hours of the everyday life. A man who holds all three states during his morning practice and abandons them to the habitual contracted states by mid-morning has not opened the channel. He has produced a brief, rhythmic dilation that the contracted baseline quickly closes again. The channel that Wattles describes as fully open is the channel of a man for whom these three states have become the baseline, the default, the atmosphere, the fundamental texture of his inner life, from which temporary disturbances occasionally arise and to which the inner life reliably returns. Reaching this baseline is the work. Maintaining it is the mastery. The practical question that arises at this point is how a man who is not currently at this baseline is to reach it. How the states are cultivated from the position of a contracted inner life that has been the default for years or decades. Wattles' answer is consistent with his entire metaphysical framework. The cultivation begins at the level of understanding, not at the level of feeling. A man cannot will himself into genuine gratitude, genuine clarity of vision, or genuine faith of expectancy. But he can understand why each of these states is the accurate response to a correctly perceived reality. And understanding, in this operative sense, creates the conditions in which the states can arise naturally rather than being performed artificially. The clarity of vision arises when the man genuinely understands that the formless substance responds to the quality of the inner image. The gratitude arises when the man genuinely perceives the supply that has always been present. The faith of expectancy arises when the man genuinely grasps the reliability of the law, Understanding precedes the state, because the state is the natural inner response to a reality correctly perceived. The cultivation process is not linear, and the man who expects a clean, sequential progression from contraction to full openness will be confused by what actually occurs. The opening of the channel is not a straight line from blocked to clear. It is a gradual shift in the dominant state. 2 steps toward openness, followed by 1 step back toward the familiar contraction. Then 3 steps forward. Then the occasional sudden retreat when circumstances press with particular severity against the developing inner state. What makes the progress sustainable is not the absence of regression, but the understanding that regression is the normal mechanism of the process. That each return to the contracted state is an opportunity to choose differently with greater understanding than was available the last time, and that each such choice incrementally raises the baseline from which the inner life operates. The channel does not open all at once. It opens progressively through the accumulated weight of choices made in favor of the opening states, until the opening becomes the default and the contraction becomes the exception. There is a specific moment in this cultivation process that Wattles identifies, though not with the drama of a sudden awakening, as the decisive transition, the moment when the man's relationship with the 3 opening states shifts from effort to recognition. Up to this moment, he has been deliberately choosing gratitude in the presence of circumstances that contradict it, deliberately holding the vision against the pull of doubt, deliberately maintaining faith against the evidence of delay or absence. These are acts of will, and they are exhausting because they swim against the current of a dominant inner life that has not yet been restructured. But at a certain point, after sufficient accumulated choosing, the current itself changes direction. The new states become the dominant ones. The old contracting ones, when they arise, are no longer the river. They are objects floating in a current that flows the other way. At this moment, the man does not experience the opening states as practices he performs. He experiences them as the truth of his own nature, finally recovered from the obscuration of years of misdirected attention. This is what Wattles means by the fully open channel. Not a technique mastered, a nature recovered. The 3-state opening, it must be emphasized, is not a permanent achievement that insulates the man from all future contraction. The channel is a dynamic condition, responsive at every moment to the quality of the inner life that it reflects. A man who has achieved the fully open state remains responsible for the governance of his inner life. Perhaps more responsible, because he now understands, with an intimacy that ignorance previously prevented, exactly what each choice about his inner state will produce. The difference between the man who has reached the open baseline and the man who is still working toward it is not that the former is immune to the contracting states. It is that the former recognizes them immediately upon their arising, understands their precise mechanical effect upon the channel, and chooses the corrective state with the speed and confidence of a man who has made that choice many times before and knows its outcome. The governance becomes easier, not because the contracting forces diminish, but because the man's mastery of the alternative increases. And mastery, in this domain as in all others, is simply the accumulated evidence of a sufficient number of correct choices, made consistently enough to reshape the ground from which all subsequent choices arise. There is a blockage that lives in the channel of nearly every man who sincerely seeks wealth through Wattles's principles and finds, despite his sincere effort, that the supply arrives in trickles rather than in the full flow that the teaching predicts. This blockage does not present itself dramatically. It does not announce its presence through visible doubt or stated disbelief. It operates in the lower registers of the inner life, beneath the conscious endorsement of the principles, beneath the genuine aspiration, beneath the effort that is real and the desire that is authentic. It is the quiet, chronic, almost subterranean conviction that abundance is possible in principle and not specifically available to this particular man in this particular life. Wattles, who worked with enough people to recognize the signature of this blockage in its many disguises, addresses it with the clinical precision of a physician who has learned to recognize a common but frequently misdiagnosed condition. He calls it, in essence, the assumption of personal exemption. And it is, in his assessment, the most consequential channel closing force that a sincere seeker of wealth will encounter. The assumption of personal exemption does not usually present itself as a belief. It presents itself as evidence, as the accumulated record of attempts made and results not fully achieved, of efforts expended and returns insufficient, of visions held and deliveries delayed. The man who carries this assumption has constructed, from this record, a specific and private conclusion about his own particular relationship with the law of receiving. That the law operates, yes, but not quite fully for him. Not quite at the level of the vision he holds. Not quite with the reliability that the teaching promises. This conclusion feels like realism. It feels like the responsible integration of experience into understanding. But Wattles identifies it as the single most reliable way for a man to ensure that his record of insufficient delivery continues indefinitely. Because the conclusion is being held as an inner state, and the inner state is what the formless substance responds to, and what the formless substance receives as its instruction is, accordingly, an instruction to continue producing the insufficient delivery that the conclusion has already accepted as characteristic of this particular man's life. The assumption of personal exemption has several characteristic symptoms that Wattles identifies and that allow it to be recognized in one's own inner life, if the examination is conducted honestly. The first is the presence of a specific internal asterisk attached to every affirmation of the law. The man says, "The supply is infinite, and the channel is the only variable." But beneath this affirmation, if the inner ear is quiet enough, there is a whisper for others. The second symptom is the pattern of effort followed by subtle, half-articulated relief when the full result does not arrive. Relief that feels shameful and is therefore quickly buried, but that reveals, in the brevity of its appearance, that the man expected the non-arrival, had prepared himself for it, had never entirely dislodged from his inner life the assumption that this would happen. The third symptom is the tendency to construct complex, practical explanations for why the result has not yet manifested. Explanations that are not wrong, exactly, but that serve the function of locating the obstruction in the external world, rather than in the inner one, and that therefore preserve the assumption of personal exemption intact beneath their surface plausibility. Wattles' response to this blockage is not therapeutic. He does not offer a process for healing the wounds that produced the assumption, for forgiving the past that confirmed it, or for gradually rebuilding confidence through a sequence of small successes. These are the responses of a different kind of teaching, one that operates at the psychological rather than the philosophical level. Wattles operates at the level of law, and his response is the response of a man who knows that the law has no exceptions. The man's right to receive is not contingent on his current circumstances, his personal history, the record of his past attempts, the frequency or severity of his past failures, his present level of development, the opinion of others regarding his capabilities, or any other condition that the competitive, evidence-based mind might cite as a disqualifying factor. The law does not grant receiving privileges based on merit. It grants them based on channel condition. And channel condition is governed by inner state, which is governed by understanding, and understanding is available to every man regardless of his history. This is the precise and unsparing formulation that Wattles offers as the correction of unworthiness, not a declaration that the man is worthy despite his failures, which is still a response to the logic of merit, but the declaration that worthiness in the conventional sense is simply irrelevant to the operation of the law. The law does not evaluate. It does not consider the applicant's background. It does not balance the man's current deserving against the delivery it will make. It responds to the channel condition, and the channel condition is determined by the inner state. And the inner state is available to be governed by any man who has understood the law with sufficient precision to make its governance possible. This is not consolation. It is correction, the specific philosophical correction that dissolves the foundation upon which the assumption of personal exemption rests. Once the foundation is dissolved, the assumption has nothing to stand on, not because the man has been declared worthy by some external authority, but because the concept of personal worthiness as a condition of receiving has been recognized as simply inapplicable to the law in question. The dissolution of unworthiness through this understanding is not an overnight process, and Wattles does not suggest that a single reading of the principle will clear the assumption from the deep inner life of a man who has maintained it for decades, but it initiates a process whose direction is reliable. Each time the assumption arises and is met with the correct understanding, not with suppression, not with affirmation, but with the precise philosophical response that removes the assumption's logical foundation. The assumption loses a small but permanent measure of its operative force. It becomes progressively less convinced of its own validity. It loses the status of obvious truth and acquires the status of a habit whose incorrectness is increasingly visible. At a certain point, it ceases to arise with genuine conviction and begins to arise only as a familiar echo, recognizable, but without the power to close the channel that it once possessed, because the channel is now governed by a man whose understanding of the law is more operative than the assumption's claim on his inner life. The man who has cleared the blockage of unworthiness from his channel does not suddenly feel exceptional or specially favored. He feels for the first time ordinary in the best sense of that word. A man subject to the same law as every other man, neither elevated nor exempted, neither specially gifted nor specially burdened. The law applies to him with the same impersonal completeness with which it applies to every human channel through which wealth has ever flowed. His victories, when they arrive, are not evidence of his exceptional qualities. They are evidence of the law's operation through an unobstructed channel. The same law, the same supply, the same channel mechanics that were always available and that are now finally being allowed to do what they were built to do. This is the deepest and most liberating truth embedded in Wattles's treatment of unworthiness. That the man who receives abundantly is not a different kind of man. He is the same kind of man, governed by the same kind of law, living in the same kind of universe, but with the channel open where it was previously closed. The difference between the abundant life and the constrained one is not a difference in the man's substance. It is a difference in a single condition, the condition of the receiving channel through which the infinite supply must pass on its way to the life that is prepared to hold it. The practical governance of the channel once the philosophical correction of unworthiness has been initiated. requires a specific kind of attention to the quality of the inner life in the ordinary moments, not the ceremonial ones. A man can manage his inner state during the hours he has designated for its management without ever achieving the baseline shift that constitutes genuine channel opening. The ordinary moments, the moments of minor frustration, of visible setback, of waiting without visible progress, of comparing the present reality to the desired one, and feeling the gap between them. These are the moments that reveal the actual condition of the channel, and the moments in which its governance is most consequentially exercised. A man whose channel remains open through a week of setbacks, delays, and invisible progress has demonstrated a quality of inner mastery that no visible success can confirm as thoroughly. He has demonstrated that the channel is no longer being governed by external conditions. It is being governed from within, from the understanding, the gratitude, and the faith that Wattles identifies as the complete and sufficient architecture of a life that receives. The final point that Wattles makes about unworthiness, and it is one that must be stated without softening, is that the man who continues to harbor the assumption of personal exemption after having genuinely understood the law is making a specific choice, not an unconscious one, not a forgivable failure of psychological development, but a specific, repeatable, reversible choice to maintain a closed channel in the presence of the knowledge required to open it. Wattles does not offer compassion for this choice. He offers clarity about its consequences. The law will continue to deliver precisely what the channel condition predicts, with the same impersonal reliability with which it has always operated. And the gap between the supply available and the supply received will remain as wide as the assumption of personal exemption requires it to be. This is not a punishment. It is the law, applied correctly to a channel whose condition the man has chosen not to change. The supply is pressing against the channel. It has never stopped pressing. The question that remains is not whether it will deliver, but whether the man is finally willing to open. The man who has opened the channel does not, in Wattles' description, become a different person in his outward behavior. He becomes a more fully realized version of the person he already is. One whose action has been freed from the anxious, grasping, scarcity-driven energy that characterized the contracted state and replaced with the directed, purposeful, unattached force of a man whose inner state is in alignment with the supply that is moving toward him. Wattles is careful to prevent the misreading of his teaching that leads to passivity. The assumption that an open channel means a man sits in receptive stillness while wealth organizes itself around him. This misreading is not merely incorrect. It represents a fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of the open channel itself. The channel does not replace action. It transforms the quality of action. Changes its source, its force, and its relationship to results in ways that make it more effective by orders of magnitude, not less necessary. The behavioral signature of the open channel is what Wattles describes as purposeful, present engaged action conducted without the inner tension of a man who believes the supply is at risk. The man with the open channel acts on every opportunity his present environment offers. He does not wait for the perfect opportunity, because the man who waits for the perfect opportunity is a man who has introduced the contracting state of idealization. The refusal to act on the present in favor of a future that better matches his expectations. He acts on the present with full commitment because he understands that action on the present is how the invisible movement of supply is translated into the visible results that constitute the full expression of his life. The quality of this action is distinctly different from the frantic, high-effort activity of the contracted man. It is calm. It is directed. It carries a quality of confident engagement rather than desperate exertion. Observers may not be able to name what they are seeing, but they feel it. The difference between a man who acts from the presence of supply and a man who acts from its absence is palpable to everyone in proximity to him. Wattles offers a specific and important clarification about the role of method in the behavioral life of the man with the open channel. He acts through the best method available to him in his current position, not the ideal method of some future circumstance, but the method that is actually available now, with the capacities he actually possesses and the resources he actually has. This is not a concession to limitation. It is the understanding that the formless substance delivers through whatever channel is prepared to receive, which means that the man's role is to be the best prepared channel currently available, not to wait until he is the perfectly prepared channel of some imagined future position. Every act of full engagement with the present best method is both an act of receiving and an act of opening, because it demonstrates to the formless substance, through the quality of attention and force brought to the present, that this is a channel prepared to handle what flows through it, and the formless substance, responding to demonstrated capacity, adjusts its delivery accordingly. The posture of receptivity that Wattles describes in the daily life of the open channel is not a posture of wide-eyed, undiscriminating openness to everything that presents itself. It is a specific quality of alert, discriminating availability. The posture of a man who knows with precision what he has impressed upon the formless substance, and who moves through the world with the quiet attention of one who expects that the creative intelligence organizing the delivery will route it through channels and persons and circumstances that may bear no surface resemblance to the vision itself. This means that the man with an open channel encounters the world with a different quality of noticing than the contracted man, where the contracted man filters his experience through the assumption of scarcity and therefore sees in most encounters the evidence of insufficiency. The man with an open channel filters his experience through the assumption of moving supply and therefore notices in the same encounters the threads of possibility that are weaving toward the form his vision has defined. This difference in noticing is not mystical. It is the functional difference between a mind oriented toward discovery and a mind oriented toward defense. And it has direct, practical consequences in the quality of the actions the man takes. The contracted man, seeing the world through the filter of scarcity, tends to act defensively, to protect what he has, to guard against what might be taken, to secure his position against the forces he perceives as threatening. The man with the open channel, seeing the world through the filter of supply and motion, tends to act generatively, to develop what he has, to call forth what is moving toward him, to participate in the creative process through which the invisible becomes visible. These are not merely different styles of action. They are different causal forces, producing radically different streams of results. Not because the external world is different for the two men, but because the internal filter through which each man perceives and responds to the same external world is fundamentally different. A critical feature of the open channel's behavioral expression is what Wattles identifies as the non-anxious relationship with time and delivery. The man with the open channel does not monitor the results of his inner work with the anxious frequency of a man who has invested his confidence in an uncertain outcome. He does not check daily to see whether the delivery has accelerated or slowed, does not interpret each visible development as a sign that the law is working or failing, does not adjust his inner state in response to the ebb and flow of visible progress. This non-anxious relationship with the timing of delivery is not indifference. It is the behavioral expression of the faith of expectancy, the settled trust in the reliability of a law that does not require the man's supervision to complete its operation. The man who monitors results anxiously is a man who has reintroduced doubt through the back door of his measurement system. Every anxious check of the progress introduces a small contraction, and a sufficient accumulation of small contractions returns the channel to a state that is meaningfully different from the fully open one. Regardless of how clean the man's morning practice has been, the relationship that the open channel man maintains with the people in his environment is also distinctly different from that of the contracted man. And Wattles identifies this difference as both a consequence of the open channel and a contributor to its maintenance. The contracted man, governed by the competitive assumption of limited supply, relates to other men through the lens of what they can give or withhold, how they affect his prospects, whether they are allies or obstacles in the competition for a finite resource. This relational quality introduces a specific and pervasive form of tension into every human interaction, a tension that the other party almost always senses, even when it is invisible at the surface level, and that closes channels of cooperation, opportunity, and generosity that would otherwise be open. The open channel man, freed from the competitive assumption, relates to other men as fellow participants in the creative process through which the formless substance expresses itself in the visible world. He can give freely because he's not afraid of insufficiency. He can receive gracefully because he's not burdened by the obligation that accompanies receiving from a limited supply. He can recognize the success of others as evidence of the law's operation without experiencing it as a diminishment of his own possibilities. This quality of relating is not merely more pleasant than the competitive alternative. It is more productive because it opens, in the relational field, the same channels of supply that the inner work opens in the metaphysical one. Wattles pays particular attention to the quality of gratitude that characterizes the open channel man's daily interaction with his circumstances. Specifically, the gratitude he directs toward those through whom supply is currently flowing into his life. This is not the performative gratitude of social convention, expressed because it is expected. It is the genuine recognition that every person who serves as a channel of supply in the man's life is, in the metaphysical view, an expression of the formless substance's creative intelligence at work, an instrument of the delivering law, not merely an individual making a transactional contribution. This recognition changes the quality of the man's gratitude from sentiment to something more nearly structural, a specific acknowledgement of the law's operation in and through the human channels it employs. And this structural gratitude, directed outward into the relational field as well as inward toward the man's own inner life, constitutes an additional opening force that the man who contains his gratitude within the boundaries of private practice never accesses. The question of patience, of how a man governs his relationship with the interval between the opening of the channel and the visible arrival of the supply, is one that Wattles addresses with particular precision, because it is in this interval that most channels are reclosed. The interval can be long, or it can appear long to a man who does not understand its nature. What is actually happening in the interval is invisible. The formless substance is reorganizing itself in accordance with the form the man has impressed upon it, routing the delivery through the available channels, preparing the specific events, circumstances, and encounters through which the supply will arrive in the visible domain. This reorganization is not instantaneous, though its speed is not governed by any clock the man can consult. It is governed by the completeness of the impression he has delivered, the clarity of the vision he has held, the consistency of the channel he has maintained, and the specific creative path the formless substance has chosen to employ for the delivery. The man who understands this does not experience the interval as evidence of non-delivery. He experiences it as the period of invisible preparation, and he governs his inner state in the interval with the same quality of faith and gratitude that he would maintain in the moment of visible receipt, because he understands that the two moments are, from the perspective of the law, the same moment. The open channel man's relationship with action evolves as his understanding deepens. In the early stages of channel opening, action and inner state feel like two separate domains of management. The inner state must be tended and the action must be directed, and both require conscious attention. As the channel opens further and the opening states become more habitual, the separation between inner state and action begins to dissolve. The action increasingly becomes the expression of the inner state rather than its companion, the outward form taken by the creative force moving through the channel, shaped by the vision but not forced by anxiety. At this point, the man finds that his action has a quality he cannot fully account for by the deliberateness of its planning. It arrives at the right moment, connects with the right person, produces the right result, not because the man calculated correctly, but because the action was the visible expression of an invisible alignment that preceded it. This is what Wattles means when he describes the open channel man as a creative center, a point through which the intelligence of the formless substance expresses itself in the visible world, using the man's action as the instrument of its delivery. The final behavioral characteristic of the open channel man that Wattles identifies is perhaps the most important for the viewer who is beginning this work. He does not require visible confirmation before maintaining the open state. This is the distinguishing mark. The contracted man requires confirmation. He needs to see evidence of progress before he will sustain the inner states that produce progress. This requirement reintroduces, through the conditions it places on the inner state, the very doubt it seeks to overcome. The open channel man has internalized the law's logic deeply enough to understand that confirmation is always and necessarily behind the cause that produced it. That the visible evidence of arrival is always a report on the past condition of the channel, not on its present one, and that the present governance of the channel is the only thing within the man's dominion, and therefore the only thing that merits his attention. He maintains the open state not because he sees confirmation, but because he understands the law. And the law, given a consistently maintained open channel, requires no further condition for the arrival of its supply. It requires only the channel. The supply is already pressing. It has always been pressing. The channel is the only variable, and the channel is the man's. There comes a point in the development of the open channel that is, in Wattles' account, qualitatively different from all the stages that preceded it, a point that is not experienced as an achievement, but as a settling, as though the inner life has reached a depth at which it is no longer susceptible to the surface disturbances that previously determined its condition. Wattles identifies this point by a specific and unmistakable inner quality, a profound and quiet sense of sufficiency in the present moment. Not the sufficiency of a man who has received everything he sought. The visible circumstances may not yet reflect the full delivery. Not the sufficiency of a man who no longer wants more, or who has abandoned his vision in favor of acceptance. It is the sufficiency of a man whose inner state is in complete correspondence with the law of receiving. A man who is, in his current moment, fully aligned with the supply that is moving toward him, and who experiences that alignment as a form of completion that requires nothing to be added to it before it can be inhabited with full presence. This quality of sufficiency is, in Wattles' formulation, the single most reliable indicator that the channel has reached full openness, that the three states of vision, gratitude, and faith of expectancy are no longer being held deliberately against the pull of contracting circumstances, but are simply the truth of the man's inner life in this moment, as natural and as effortless as breathing. The anxious monitoring ceases at this point, not because the man has given up on the vision, but because the need to monitor was always an expression of doubt. And the doubt has been displaced by the settled, organic knowing that the supply is moving and the channel is clear. The need to force or manipulate or accelerate the delivery dissolves, not because the man has become indifferent to the outcome, but because the force and manipulation were always expressions of the contracted state's distrust of the law. And that distrust is no longer the dominant texture of the inner life. What remains is a clear, directed, unattached engagement with the present, the full expression of the open channel in its mature form. What Wattles describes as following from this state is not a sudden dramatic arrival of wealth in a single transformative moment. It is something more consistent and, in the end, more substantial. The beginning of a continuous, expanding flow. Wealth arriving not from one direction, but from many. Not at one moment, but in a sustained and progressive stream, delivered through channels and persons and circumstances that the man's contracted mind, had it remained in its contracted state, could never have anticipated. The formless substance, given a fully open and clearly directed channel, does not deliver minimally. It delivers in proportion to the aperture of the channel, which, when fully open, is limited only by the clarity and breadth of the vision the man has impressed upon it. A clear channel in correspondence with an infinite supply produces, by the logic of the law, an infinite potential for delivery. The specific form and magnitude of what arrives are shaped by the vision and by the man's current capacity to use and to manage what flows through him. But the direction of the flow, once the channel is genuinely clear, is not uncertain. The law has no mechanism for withholding from an open channel. It is only the mechanism of delivering through one. The experience of this state is worth describing in its full precision, because the man who does not know what he is looking for may pass through it without recognizing it as the confirmation he has been seeking. Wattles describes it as a deep, quiet calm that does not depend on the absence of challenges or difficulties in the visible world. Challenges continue. Difficulties arise. The outer life does not immediately become the smooth, frictionless expression of the inner vision. There is always a period of completion, of the visible world catching up to the invisible reality that the man's inner work has already established. But the man's relationship with these challenges is different. He meets them not with the anxious, depleting energy of a man who believes they may determine the outcome, but with the steady, directed force of a man who understands that they are the surface texture of a delivery process that is already in motion and already assured. He is not unfazed by difficulties. He is undetermined by them, which is an entirely different thing, and which is the precise and practical meaning of the fully open channel in the lived experience of the man who inhabits it. The signal of full openness then also has a relational and social dimension that Wattles identifies as significant. When the man's channel is fully clear, other people respond to him differently. Not because he has become more charming or more socially skilled, but because the quality of presence he carries is different. The contracted man broadcasts, in every interaction, the frequency of his dominant inner state. The anxious, grasping, competitive energy of one who is operating from insufficiency. People respond to this frequency with the caution and guardedness it naturally evokes. The open channel man broadcasts the frequency of his dominant inner state. the calm, clear, generous energy of one who is operating from abundance. People respond to this frequency with a corresponding openness, with generosity, with willingness, with the kind of spontaneous cooperation that the contracted man attributes to luck or timing. But that is, in Wattles' framework, the social expression of the law of correspondence. The inner state draws to itself the outer conditions that match it. A man broadcasting abundance becomes, in his social environment, a center of abundance. A point toward which the supply, moving through human channels as much as through impersonal circumstances, naturally and consistently flows. The final word that Wattles offers on the fully open channel is not a description of the great things it makes possible. Though the things it makes possible are, by the logic of the law, as great as the vision the man has defined. His final word is on the nature of the channel itself, that it is not a state achieved and thereafter secured, but a living condition that reflects, at every moment, the quality of the inner life that produces it. The man who has reached the state of full openness has not completed a work. He has arrived at the natural living expression of a man whose understanding of the law has become operative, whose inner life is governed, not by habit or default, but by the specific and continuously exercised dominion of a man who knows what he is, what is available to him, and what single condition governs the arrival of everything the supply contains. The channel is open. The reservoir has always been full. The delivery has never required anything from the supply and everything from the receiver. And the receiver, once he has genuinely understood this, once the understanding has penetrated below the level of endorsement into the operative level of his actual governing inner state, has placed himself in the one position from which the infinite supply can do what it has always been pressing to do: flow. The supply of wealth available to every human being has never been the variable. This is the first and final truth that Wattles' entire teaching drives toward. And it must be understood not as an inspiring claim, but as a philosophical position of absolute precision. The formless substance is not rationed. The creative intelligence that governs the visible universe does not maintain a ledger of deserving and undeserving, of favored and forgotten. It responds to the channel condition of the receiver and to nothing else, with the same impersonal completeness that governs every other law of nature. The supply presses outward at every moment, through every available channel, with the full force of an infinite and inexhaustible source. It has been doing this for every moment of the man's life, including the moments when nothing arrived, including the years of apparent scarcity and visible insufficiency. The reservoir did not empty during those years. The channel was closed during those years. And the closure was not the work of circumstance, fate, or the indifference of the universe. It was the work of the man's own inner life, operating in precise and faithful accordance with the law it had never been shown. The channel, therefore, has always been the only variable, the single point of intervention between the infinite supply and the specific life in which that supply was intended to express itself. And the channel is composed entirely of inner states, of the quality of the dominant mental and emotional condition through which the man relates to the law of receiving, to his own right to receive, and to the specific form of wealth his vision has defined. This is the totality of what is within the man's power to govern, and it is the totality of what requires governing. No external conditions need change before the channel can open. No circumstances need improve, no market conditions need shift. No opportunities need present themselves that have not already been available. The channel opens or closes based solely on what is happening in the inner life of the man who is doing the receiving. And the inner life is the one domain over which the man has absolute and immediate dominion, regardless of his external position. To open the channel is therefore to perform the most decisive act available to any human being seeking wealth, more decisive than any strategy, any plan, any deployment of external resource or social advantage. It is to address the only cause that has ever been operative in the production of the results he currently inhabits, and to keep it open, to make the three states of clear vision, active gratitude, and faith of expectancy the dominant, continuous, baseline condition of the inner life, is to establish a correspondence between the man's inner architecture and the infinite supply that, once established and maintained, produces what Wattles describes as the mathematical certainty of abundance, not the hope of abundance, not the probability of abundance. The certainty, the same certainty with which a fully opened valve in a pressurized system produces flow, the same certainty with which cause produces effect in every domain governed by natural law. Open the channel and the reservoir does the rest. This is the complete formula. It contains every instruction, implies every discipline, and describes every result. The man who genuinely understands what it means to open the channel, and who genuinely understands that the reservoir has always been full, holds in his understanding the entirety of what Wattles spent a lifetime attempting to communicate. Keep it closed, and no amount of effort, strategy, intelligence, social advantage, or external resource can compensate for the single constriction at the point of receiving. Because all of these compensatory forces operate at the level of the visible world, and the blockage is not in the visible world. It is in the invisible one. It is in the inner state of the man who is working so hard to achieve by external force what would arrive by law if only the channel were clear. This is the synthesis of everything that has been examined here. That the man who lacks is not a man who has been denied, but a man who has been blocked. And that the block is his, constructed from the materials of his own inner life, maintained by habits of thought old enough to feel like facts, and correctable by the same law whose violation produced them. The law that closed the channel is the law that opens it. The same formless substance that withheld nothing is the same formless substance that delivers everything. And the only difference between the man who receives and the man who does not is a single variable, entirely within the man's dominion, available for governance at every moment of every day, requiring nothing from the external world before it can be exercised. The channel is the man's to open. The supply is the law's to deliver. When these two facts are held simultaneously, with the operative certainty that Wattles demands of genuine understanding, the outcome is not uncertain. It is already determined. The only remaining question is the timing of the man's decision to stop closing what was built to be open. Wallace Wattles spoke with the authority of a man who had arrived at his principles, not through intellectual inheritance, but through the demanding process of personal verification, who had taken the laws he described into the laboratory of his own life and emerged with the results that those laws predicted. When he wrote in the pages of his most enduring work that the grateful mind is constantly fixed upon the best, and that it therefore tends to become the best and will receive the best, he was not offering comfort or poetic encouragement. He was delivering a precise and complete description of the causal mechanism by which the inner state of gratitude opens the receiving channel to its full capacity. The mechanism by which a mind fixed on the best impression of the good already present reorganizes itself from the inside out to become structurally correspondent with the quality of what it holds in its attention. The phrase tends to become the best is not a vague prediction. It is a description of what Wattles understands as the formative power of sustained attention, that the mind takes on the quality of what it consistently attends to. In the same way that a person living in a certain atmosphere eventually breathes it so naturally that the atmosphere becomes the self, a mind that habitually fixes its attention on the good that is present, on the supply that is moving, on the law that is always operative, becomes, through this sustained fixation, a mind whose structure corresponds to abundance. It does not merely believe in abundance in the abstract. It is, in its operative condition, an abundant mind, one that perceives, processes, and responds to the world from the inner position of a man whose channel is constitutionally aligned with the supply pressing to flow through it. The phrase, "it takes the form or character of the best," reaches into the deepest level of what Wattles teaches about the relationship between inner state and outer expression. Form, in the philosophical tradition Wattles draws from, is not merely shape. It is the organizing principle, the pattern that determines what a thing is, what it does, and what it attracts and produces. When a mind takes the form of the best, when gratitude has been sustained long enough and genuinely enough to restructure the inner life at the level of its dominant organizing principle, the man does not merely feel better. He becomes, at the level of his character, a different kind of receiver. His channel is no longer a channel that must be deliberately held open against the current of his own contradictory inner life. It is, at the level of its form, an open channel, because openness has become its defining condition rather than a state it periodically achieves. And then Wattles delivers the precise consequence. It will receive the best. Not it might receive the best. Not it has a good chance of receiving the best. It will receive the best. Because the receiving of the best is the lawful result of a channel whose form corresponds to the quality of what it is aligned to receive. The law does not grant and withhold. It delivers in correspondence with the aperture and the quality of the channel through which it must pass, a channel that has taken the form of the best. Through the sustained, genuine, operative practice of gratitude that Wattles describes, is a channel calibrated to receive what corresponds to its condition. The supply, pressing to deliver the best it contains, finds in this channel a receiver prepared for what is being sent. The correspondence is complete. The delivery is the natural and inevitable result. The final sentence of Wattles's summation, that the whole process of mental adjustment and atonement can be summed up in one word: gratitude, is not a rhetorical simplification. It is the compression of a complete philosophical system into its single operative principle. Mental adjustment means the restructuring of the inner life from the contracted state to the open one. The replacement of the scarcity-governed, fear-driven, competitive orientation with the abundance-governed, faith-sustained, creative one. Atonement, in its original and precise meaning, means at-one-ment, the state of being in complete correspondence, of having no gap between the man's inner condition and the law that governs his receiving. When Wattles says that gratitude accomplishes both, he is saying that genuine, sustained, operative gratitude performs the complete inner work that every other principle in his teaching is designed to support. It adjusts the mental architecture. It dissolves the contraction. It holds the channel open. It aligns the man with the supply. And it does all of this not through separate mechanisms applied in sequence, but through the single, unified act of being genuinely continuously, operatively thankful for the good that is present and the supply that is moving. This is the master instrument. This is the channel opening principle in its most concentrated and most powerful form. Every man who reads these words stands at the same threshold that Wattles identified as the decisive point of the receiving life. The threshold between understanding the principle and inhabiting it. Wattles cannot cross that threshold on the man's behalf. The teaching can be given. The law can be described with perfect precision. The mechanics of the channel can be mapped to the last detail, but the crossing is the man's act. The specific, deliberate, unreserved choice to take up the posture of gratitude, not as a practice performed in designated hours, but as the fundamental orientation of the entire inner life. Held continuously as a governing principle, rather than visited periodically as a devotional exercise. This choice is available at every moment. It does not require preparation. It does not require the resolution of outstanding circumstances or the achievement of a better outer position from which to begin. It requires only the understanding of what it is, why it works, and the willingness to make it the law of one's own inner life, rather than a technique one occasionally remembers to employ. The wealth you have been unable to account for, the gap between what your effort has produced and what your vision has always pointed toward, is not evidence of the law's failure. It is evidence of the channel's condition. And the channel is yours to govern. The supply has never been the question. It is pressed against your receiving capacity at every moment of your life with the full force of an infinite and inexhaustible source. It presses now as you receive these words, with the same force and the same indifference to your past record of reception. It does not hold your previous closures against you. It does not require an accounting of the years the channel was blocked before it will resume its delivery. It requires only the channel, open, clear, and held in the state of gratitude that Wattles, with the precision of a master who has seen the outcome, identifies as the complete and sufficient condition of all receiving. The reservoir is full. The law is operative. The channel is yours. What has been examined in this teaching is not a philosophy to be admired from a respectful distance. It is a law to be applied, specifically, personally, and without the private exception that the comfortable mind reflexively carves out between the general endorsement of a principle and its full self-application. Wattles was not describing a category of exceptional men for whom the channel opens easily and abundantly. He was describing the universal condition of the law and the universal availability of the channel opening state to every human being who chooses, with operative understanding, to inhabit it. The exceptional man, in Wattles's framework, is not the man born with the channel already open. He is the man who understands the law clearly enough to make the choice to open it, and who makes that choice consistently enough to change his baseline. The wealth you want is not being withheld. It has never been withheld. It is being blocked. Blocked by the specific inner states that occupy the channel you were built to receive through. Blocked by fear, which is the conviction that the supply may not be sufficient. Blocked by resentment, which is the fixation on what has not arrived. Blocked by competitive thinking, which is the assumption that wealth must be taken from a limited and contested supply. Blocked by unworthiness, which is the private exemption of the self from the law's full operation. And blocked by attachment to method, which is the refusal to receive from any direction except the one the anxious mind has decided to watch. Every one of these states is within your dominion to address. Every one of them yields to the same corrective force, genuine, operative, continuously maintained gratitude, held as a law rather than a practice. Clear the channel. This is the complete instruction. Deceptively simple in its statement, absolutely demanding in its execution. Clearing the channel means examining the inner life with honest precision to identify every state that is currently contracting the aperture of receiving, and then displacing those states not through suppression, but through the genuine installation of their opposites, maintained with sufficient consistency to become the dominant condition of the inner life. It means holding the vision with clarity and certainty rather than with hope and anxiety. It means inhabiting the faith of expectancy as the settled, operative conviction that the delivery is already in motion. Not as a mental exercise performed during good moments, but as the stable background of consciousness from which every ordinary action of the day arises. Hold the vision. These 3 words contain the second complete instruction. Not hold the vision when you remember to. Not hold the vision until circumstances make it difficult. Hold the vision as the specific and continuous form you have impressed upon the formless substance, the precise and emotionally inhabited image of the desired reality, maintained with the certainty of a man who has already accepted delivery, who knows that the form he holds in his inner life is already real in the only domain that precedes visibility, and whose role is not to manufacture the result through force of will, but to maintain the channel condition through which the already organized supply can complete its transit. The vision is not your hope. It is your command to the creative intelligence of the universe. Treat it accordingly. Live in gratitude as a law, not a practice. This is the 3rd instruction, and it is the one that governs the other 2. A practice is performed, a law is inhabited. Gratitude as a practice means the man visits the state of thankfulness at designated moments and returns to his habitual inner condition in between. Gratitude as a law means that the man's habitual inner condition is thankfulness, that the genuine acknowledgement of the good that is present and the supply that is moving is not something he adds to his day, but the fundamental atmosphere in which every act of his day occurs. This is the transformation Wattles describes. This is what the grateful mind, constantly fixed upon the best, looks like in its lived expression. And this is the complete and sufficient condition for opening the channel through which the infinite supply presses to deliver the full expression of a wealthy, creative, purposeful life. Write in the comments, "The channel is open." Write it not as a slogan and not as a wish, but as the declaration of a specific inner state you are choosing in this moment to inhabit permanently. The declaration of a man who has understood the law, who has accepted his right to receive under that law, and who has made the choice to govern his inner life accordingly, beginning now, without exception, without the private reservation of a self who is not quite sure it applies to him. The channel is open when you say it as a man who means it as a commitment rather than a hope. The reservoir is waiting to deliver. The law is waiting to operate. The only remaining variable is you, the specific condition of the channel you carry in this moment and in every moment that follows, through which the infinite supply of a universe that has never been empty is pressing, always pressing, to arrive.